Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel, and today a bit of a ramble about Brandon Sanderson and his Cosmere universe. I am right in the middle of reading the fourth secret project, which is called The Sunlit Man, and I am enjoying it, but I did notice something about it that has compounded a concern that was already kind of growing in me from previous Sanderson recent books. And then this concern was made even greater when I put up a post on my community page on YouTube asking for your unpopular opinions. And I'm going to do a separate video about those opinions, but there was one in particular that stood out to me because it was related to this. And I just got too excited and I didn't want to wait. And I figured, let me just make my own separate video about this. And the opinion came from user HawkFu, and he writes, I prefer the small Cosmere tie-ins rather than huge plot-dependent ones. For example, I don't like Elantris magic blatantly being used in Mistborn books, etc. I don't mind novellas or standalone books that are heavily tied together. I love them. But particularly in later Cosmere books, it's becoming less about our main characters and more about fancy references to other books in the series. And that does sound very much like the concern that I'm having, which is that Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere is maybe becoming a little bit too much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that is a reason for concern. It's not that it's a bad thing, but it is something to be mindful of and be wary of. And to give kind of context for that and why I feel that way, I should explain my relationship to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it started in 2008. I was a junior in high school still, because Iron Man 1 came out on in the first half of the year before summer vacation. So I was still a junior in high school. And from Iron Man to Avengers Endgame, that was 10 years of my life where this amazing event was being unfolded in cinemas, and it was a lot of fun. And those early movies were their own separate entities that were standalone, and then they eventually became interconnected with the main Avengers movies, of which there were 4 of them. And of course, it all culminated in the big grand event, Avengers Endgame. And that was a very satisfying conclusion to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Unfortunately, it has continued for years since then, and it has not been anywhere near as good as it used to be. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is that it's gotten way too big and it's gotten way too dependent on interconnectivity. So it's now the movies are less standalone, and there are prerequisites to understand what's going on. Spider-Man 3, the No Way Home, Long Way Home, I don't know whatever, but the third one with Tobey Maguire in it. Even that movie, the prerequisite there is that you have seen the 3 Tobey Maguire movies and the 2 Andrew Garfield movies, or at least one of each, and just have that context, so that you know Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and you know the Dr. Octopus from the second movie. You know that about Gwen Stacy in Andrew Garfield's movies. So there's an entry fee to understand what's going on in that movie. Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which I haven't actually seen yet, and it's the only new MCU movie that I do want to see because I like James Gunn. But the very idea that I saw someone post this online, so this isn't original coming from me, but the idea that if you don't watch any of the other MCU movies and you just watch the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, there is this decision where after the second movie, they kill Gamora off screen, essentially, and then replace her with like an alternate universe version of her with only some of her memories. And That isolated is wild because you need to have seen the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame movies to fill that gap. It no longer becomes a self-contained story. And that's where you get people falling off of watching your movies and enjoying your content, because now suddenly there's a lot of homework to do. And then Disney Plus is adding all these TV shows, and they are not very good, with a few exceptions. And they're long, and they're a time investment, and because you need to have Disney Plus, they're a money investment, and it's just less and less special because of all that legwork you have to do just to be caught up. And it's reaching a point where you can't miss anything for fear that you're going to lose context. And I swear I'm going to get back to how this relates to Sanderson in a moment, although it should maybe be self-evident. But this MCU model is also based on comic books in general. I mean, Marvel and DC have had shared universes for forever now. For better or worse. That's why they keep having to restart at issue ones or reboot the entire damn universe, because every time they do it, things just get exponentially out of hand with all the crossovers and events, and the only thing left is a hard reset. That's not an option with the Cosmere. The Cosmere is only in its growing stage right now, and Sanderson obviously has an end game in mind of his own. And I am loving it. I've read every single Cosmere novel and novella and short story that has been published to this point. So to read The Sunlit Man and see the Cosmere connections that are not just like references, but integral to understanding the story, it's not a problem for me. But where this becomes a concern is the new readers, the people who are hearing good things about the Cosmere from fans like me and saying, oh, I would love to get into that. Where do I start? And it's like, okay, so you can't start with The Sunlit Man, even though it's the newest release, because you need to have read all 4 Stormlight Archive books before that. And that's 4 Stormlight Archive books minimum, not even including the novellas. That's a 5,000-page prerequisite to understand fully what's happening in The Sunlit Man. And that's not even it, because you also kind of need to have read Warbreaker to understand what's going on in Sunlit Man. And like Hawk Fu mentions, Elantris magic is becoming more and more prevalent in more Cosmere books. This kind of started with, in my opinion, The Lost Metal, the conclusion of Mistborn Era 2, which, again, I really enjoyed. I liked Mistborn Era 2 a lot. I have a whole video about that, about how I liked Era 2 more than Era 1. But that finale is very much rooted in the Cosmere and requires you to have knowledge outside of Mistborn to get it. And that's where concern comes in, because as this universe grows and the interconnectivity becomes more and more connected, the web becomes more tangled, you're reaching a point where you're not allowed to skip any books. And that's by design, maybe from a business decision perspective for Sanderson, to sell books. Although realistically, his fans are going to probably buy everything that comes out anyway. But again, it's that new reader, a new reader who's discovering the Cosmere, looking to get into it and saying like, oh God, so to understand this book that was printed, a year ago, I have to start all the way back here. I have to read all of this just so I have the full context for this most recent book. That's off-putting. That's not something that every new reader wants. And it's a little bit, gatekeeping is not the right word, because that's not how we use that word anymore. But it is a price of admission, and not everyone's willing to pay that price. So that's my concern for the Cosmere. I am still enjoying it very much as someone who has read all of the Cosmere up to this point. Would I like for the individual series to kind of stay in their own lanes? Kind of. A little. I'm torn, because I think back on the Marvel universe from Iron Man to Avengers Endgame, and that journey culminating in that movie theater experience, finally seeing the conclusion to this story that unfolded for my formative years was incredible. It was wonderful. And there's nothing I've ever experienced like it before until this, which is doing it again, which is great. But then I think about what happened after Endgame. And then I think about all the people who are going to start the Marvel Universe like now, who like the younger generation that's kind of coming in. That's a big price of admission. And I should clarify, this isn't the case for every single new Brandon Sanderson Cosmere book. I'm noticing it very heavily for The Sunlit Man. I noticed it for The Lost Metal, but it wasn't really the case for Tress of the Emerald Sea. There were Cosmere references in that one that it helped to know, especially at the end, but you didn't really need it, I felt, to truly appreciate it. Same for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. In fact, a friend of mine who's never read a Cosmere book before read that one, and he knew that there was stuff being talked about sometimes that he didn't get, but he was still able to just enjoy that book on its own. So it's not like a ubiquitous problem across every single book, but I think about The Lost Metal, the conclusion to a main series, like Mistborn, and how these other magics and these other worlds are being brought into. If it can be brought into that, then that means it can be brought into Stormlight. It means that we're going to be getting sequels potentially to other standalone books that are now going to be featuring other magic systems as well, and that web is just going to keep getting more and more tangled, and that's the concern. So that's why I say that this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that I am wary of because it's not everyone's cup of tea. And as long as Sanderson keeps writing good books, it might not matter because people will continue to buy all of them and read all of them. Even if they don't necessarily enjoy all of them, they'll have that context. But it is a risky game to play. And I could totally see why it's not going to be for everybody. And I would love to hear your opinions on this in the comments. Do you have a problem with these extremely interconnected universes? Is it something that you prefer to see? Do you like that idea? Would you rather things stay separated from each other, but maybe dropping occasional references? Like, I kind of think of like Stephen King in the Kingverse, where he'll make mention of one of his other books or the events of one of his other books in a newer one, where he'll mention like offhand comment about Cujo or something. And you'd be like, oh, I recognize that's Cujo. But it's not integral to the story, but they do technically exist in the same universe. So do you prefer that? Do you want them to interconnect? Let me know. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.